Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Friday Ramblings. It's another lovely month. We are full-blown into fall. That's right, because it's September. And that means that we are getting ready to count down to our special time of year. That's right, folks. This is September, and we have 5 ramblings for you, because there's 5 Fridays in September this year. And that means 5 left before our special Halloween-themed October glory, which of course impacts not just the Friday Ramblings channel, but our Tuesday game streams. So look forward to the time of year where we do our most thematic fun and games. However, it's not just Halloween. No, we do occasionally sprinkle a little bit of Thanksgiving and Christmas love into those months of the year as well, so be on the lookout. Make sure you got yourself subscribed and notified, because even if you're not into the theme channels and the theme shows, we have got something for you every week. And in September, we're going to continue to bounce around our usual topics, and we're starting with some video game fun. That's right, it is another wonderful franchise breakdown. We're going to go run quick and dirty through a video game franchise that spans the decades and may or may not get touched upon later on in more detail with specific games. I don't know. That's the joy of the breakdowns. We introduce the big concepts, so potentially down the line we can do follow-ups, focusing on the individual pieces. So let's get right down to it. We are, of course, discussing Metroid, one of Nintendo's first-party franchises. This is the ultimate, the lovingness, the awesomeness, the gun arm. So let's go ahead and bust a couple things out before we get into the specifics of the game-by-game breakdown. Metroid is one half of the infamous Metroidvania subgenre of games. Metroidvania as a term refers to Metroid and Castlevania, and specifically the fact that both games, even in the earliest games in their series, but most definitely after a couple of sequels, played like generally straightforward games in that they're easy to pick up, easy to learn, and have somewhat defined goals, but also freely encourage exploration and involve a lot of back and forth backtracking. As such, people have made games blatantly designed to evoke the Metroidvania feel, thus the name of the subgenre. Still, they are basically action-adventure games, and in the case of Metroid specifically, sci-fi, always taking place in outer space. No Metroid game up to this point has taken place on Earth, let alone without any kind of alien presence, so they are deep into sci-fi. Metroid, of course, also features one of video games' first female protagonists in Samus Aran. Yes, when the first game came out, unless you got the super good ending for completing the game in a relatively efficient manner, you didn't know the character was a female. It was one of the big aha gotchas that first struck the video game industry and is still fondly remembered to this day. Now, of course, over the years, hey, see Samus Aran outside of her battle suit ending graphic has been tweaked over the years. In the earliest games, there was the infamous bathing suit look, although you could justify it as more of a leotard type deal, but it's usually referred to, at least among the fan community, as the bathing suit look, which would change in color depending on a particular game, including a Game Boy game in which there was no color to start with, so it was just monochrome like everything else in the game. However, the more recent entries have introduced the Zero Suit, a skin-tight bodysuit that involves its own level of circuitry and technology to it that Samus wears under her main exoskeletal style battle-loving power suit, which itself has a few iterations because, like all good video games, Samus Aran, as she explores and beats bosses, gains various upgrades. Now again, because we want this video to be relatively short, we are not going to go into super details about the equipment and upgrades featured in various Metroid games. That is definitely a video topic of its own. But we are introducing that concept to you if you have never played a Metroid game. And if you haven't, I feel sorry for you because this franchise is freaking awesome. Samus Aran, of course, has also been present in every edition of Super Smash Bros. And in the most recent Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, introduced antagonists Ridley and Dark Samus. So there you go. There's also been various cameos in other games, but to much lesser extent. Let's get into our game-by-game breakdown. The original Metroid game is, as we said, a first-party game developed and published by Nintendo. It was originally released in Japan in August of 1986, and in North America a year later in 1987, with Europe release following in January 88. Set on the planet Zebus, the story follows Samus Aran as she attempts to retrieve the parasitic Metroid organisms that were stolen by the space pirates led by Mother Brain, who want to replicate the Metroids and use them as biological weapons to destroy their enemies. Typical classic bad guy stuff. However, it should be noted that the Metroids themselves, being lower level intelligence style organisms, don't really necessarily appreciate the difference between who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, and you actually do have to kill many Metroids over the course of the game, as they're kind of free floating around the planet and attacking anybody and everybody, including Samus. Now, the first Metroid game was both a critical and commercial success. It was a game that, as I said, introduced a lot of freestyle roaming and exploring, as well as the upgradable weapons we mentioned, and a dark and moody atmosphere. One of the things that defines many Metroid games is that you have no allies. You are on your own on a planet surrounded by enemies. It is kind of a thing that makes you feel tense and nervous, because no matter where you go, except for the occasional, single room rest point, which really more focus showed up on in later games, there's nowhere safe. Enemies respawn after you clear an area, and you never know what kind of boss is waiting around the corner. So, good times. Let's find the notes here. We're going to go ahead and jump ahead slightly, just because this makes a better flow of conversation for the breakdowns, but in 2004, Metroid would receive a remake on the Game Boy Advance called Metroid Zero Mission, which not only ported the game over to a new system, but featured somewhat enhanced graphics, as well as some extra areas, making it kind of a expanded director's cut edition of the original Metroid. The Zero Mission has received much acclaim for its new content, gameplay, and improvements over the original, though it did receive minor criticism for its, what for a Game Boy game, or a Game Boy Advance game, was considered a short time length. as the new areas are not a large amount of them, and as such, the game can, if you have any clue what you're doing in a Metroid game, be completed in what, as I said a second ago, for a Game Boy Advance game is relatively short time. Still, it did enhance the story of the original Metroid, especially concerning the eventually made sequels, since this being a remake, knew about the expanded stories done in later games and was able to make it this first chapter story more of a smooth transition into the later chapters of the ongoing Samus Aran saga. So, good times on that. It should be noted, though, that completion of the game does unlock an emulated version of the original Metroid game, and people who play Zero Mission were also able to unlock features with the released around the same time Metroid Fusion, which we will touch on in a second. So, good times. Honestly, if you have never played the first Metroid, while I am generally not a big fan of remakes, I will say, especially if you plan on covering multiple games in the series, or somebody who, as I said, does like a little bit more of a story element to it, I would recommend playing Zero Mission, as the game is an improvement without seeming judgmental of the first game like a lot of remakes tend to do. You know what I'm talking about. Some of these remakes out there, you know, they kind of come at it with this attitude of, oh, we can make a better game than the original because, you know, we're so much smarter now. We have generations of games to look back on and see what should be done and shouldn't be done. You know, unlike those guys in the early eras of video games that they had to figure everything out by, you know, trying stuff and seeing what worked. We're so much smarter now. Hate that attitude. Zero Mission, though, as I said, was not programmed with that attitude, so good on them. So, that leads us to the second release game chronologically. Yes, folks, we are going to, as I said, except for bouncing around with some remake issues here, generally covering these games in the sequence they were released. Plot-wise, the chronological timeline of events is not the same as the way the games were released and published. Some games are prequels to others, but it's okay. There are many people out there that you can watch videos of who will give you a timeline breakdown of the Metroid series. We don't want to sit there and step on their toes. Plus, as I said, it's a little easier to do it in the general order games were released, since this is a intro to the concept video. Metroid 2, Return of Samus, was developed and published by Nintendo for the Game Boy, released in North America in November 91, and in Japan and Europe in 92. So yes, unlike most people's assumptions of how the video game industry works, especially when you're dealing with first-party things like Nintendo games, America got the release slightly before Japan. The game follows bounty hunter Samus Aran on her mission to eradicate the Metroids from their home planet, SR388, before the space pirates can obtain them and, once again, try to weaponize the Metroids. This introduced a couple interesting features to the game. One of which, besides the fact that it was a whole new planet to explore, meant that you also had, throughout the game, a Metroid countdown meter, as there were a finite number of Metroids left on the planet after the events of the original game, and because your mission is essentially extinction, species-specific genocide, the game includes a meter to let you know how many Metroids are left, and thus gives you an approximation of how far into the game you are progressing. This also introduced the idea of there being multiple subspecies of Metroids. Well, I don't even know if subspecies is the right word. Basically, the idea is that the Metroids you saw in the early game were like juveniles of their species, and that as Metroids continue to age and get exposed to different environmental triggers, they will go through different metamorphosis, molting type things, creating different Metroids for you to fight with different battle strategies and different abilities, all leading up to taking influence from various Insect Kingdom creatures, a Queen Metroid that is massive and angry at you slaying its young. Now, I've played this game. This was actually the first Metroid game I owned. Not the first one I played, but the first one I owned. And thus was able to just continue to play at and poke at until I was done with it. And I will say, while the original game did lack a map feature, which was introduced in starting with the third game, which we'll touch on in a second, the Game Boy game, due to its monochrome graphics and thus making it a little harder to tell one zone from another, honestly, that was one of the biggest flaws with this game. There were points, especially where I had set the game down and not been able to play it for, a week or so at a time. I literally couldn't remember what area I had recently been in, what area I was currently in, because with one color to work with and limited graphical capability, the areas really blended together. This is why the original Metroid 2 ranks low on my personal list of Metroid games, because it's a very hard game to navigate unless you're just playing it straight through. And it's a Game Boy game. It was a portable system. It was designed to play, Game Boy games at their best are where you can play them for a little bit, set them down, walk away, go do something else, play other games, come back to it later at your leisure and play it again and not feel like you have no clue what you're doing. So, personally, I thought that was a major flaw in the game. It is still a fun game to play. However, like the original Metroid, this has been remade. Much more recently, in fact. I felt it was a long delayed and release. And that, hey, if they were going to remake this game and, fess up to the existence of it, they probably could have redone it like in the era of the Game Boy Advance. Or, would have made a good remake for the N64, which, spoilers, didn't get a Metroid game. But, there's reasons for that. But we did get it eventually. Metroid Samus Returns came out in 2017 for the Nintendo 3DS. And features redone graphics, updated controls and user interface, and new gameplay mechanics not seen in previous 2D Metroid titles, such as a melee counterattack and the ability to aim freely at any angle. This meant that this game is far and away fixes a lot of the problems with Metroid 2. So, yeah, real quick, let's go ahead and say it. Besides the fact we got the full color now, if you're gonna play a version of Metroid 2, go ahead and play the 3DS version. Metroid Samus Returns is going to be a much more enjoyable ride than the original Game Boy Metroid 2. Now, if you want to be a full completionist, I'm not saying, by all means, go ahead and play Metroid 2, but honestly, if you just want to get the best of the Metroid experience and not play every single game in the franchise, I would play Samus Returns, the 3DS version. It also features amiibo support and has completionist bonuses such as art gallery, sound tests, and fusion mode, an extra hard difficulty setting which features Samus's unique armor from the Metroid Fusion game. Things just keep coming back around. Old games are linking into new games. It's almost like this was designed as a single franchise and meant to pay respect to the games that came before. What a concept. Amazing. Next up, we get the third official game in the series, Super Metroid, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1994. Now, for many people, this was where they got into Metroid, and frankly, to this day, I will still debate people on the fact that this is potentially the best Metroid game ever created. Super Metroid storyline picks up where Super Metroid 2's left off. Literally, the opening intro cinematic gives you the closing minutes of Metroid 2, in which, after destroying the Queen Metroid, a final egg hatches, and the baby Metroid imprints on Samus Aran, feeling that Samus is the baby's mother, and thus it wants to protect and be nice to Samus. Samus, recognizing that this is the last Metroid, and that as long as it's with her and away from the space pirates, it is not a harm to the galaxy at large, decides to leave it with a Space Federation lab so they can do a little bit of analysis on it and understand more about the Metroids, just in case. Sure enough, though, Mother Brain's top Lieutenant Ridley comes back, having not quite been dead yet, and kidnaps the baby Metroid, bringing it to the space pirates, who have managed to also resurrect Mother Brain and set themselves back up on the planet Zebus. The game is, frankly, it is just about one of the best Super Nintendo games ever made. And since the Super Nintendo is, at least in my humble opinion, one of the best consoles ever made, especially concerning its game library, seriously, you need to play this game. If you don't play any other Metroid game, if you've never played a single Metroid game, and you want to play a game to, like, look, I'm just going to play one game so I can understand what the fuss about this Metroid stuff is. Just give me a great Metroid game. I'm going to tell you every time, play Super Metroid. Play Super Metroid. Play the flying, you know what, I don't want to say it because I try to make this all ages friendly channel, out of Super Metroid. Huge world, introduces the map screen, upgrades galore, great boss fights, wonderful weapon upgrades with a variety of weapons, including a couple beams that you can actually switch between instead of just being straight stacking upgrades, so that you can customize your gameplay experience. For those people who are into this kind of thing, there is some sequence breaking, infamous sequence breaking spots for you just playing get to the ending speedrunners. As I said, the music and the visuals just increase that isolated, danger around every turn mood that I spoke of in the earlier Metroid games. It is everything a video game should be. I could literally spend an entire 30-minute video just praising Super Metroid, and I may do that one day. Like, this is it, folks. This is what we've been building up to. This is the game that defies the convention that sequels never surpass the original. This is the game that defies the convention going the opposite way of, as we come up with better technology for our hardware, we make better games. No, screw you. I'm sorry. But You might be able to make an argument for Prime. A lot of people are saying it about Dread, which we're going to touch on in a minute. I know I'm jumping around a bit here. But pound for pound, I mean, Super Metroid is simply damn near a perfect video game. So just play it. If you have never played it, played it. If you haven't played it in the last 10 years, play it again. Rediscover its awesomeness. Just do it. So, moving on real quick, we get into a bit of a rapid release of video games here. We had previously mentioned the Game Boy Advance remake of Metroid 1. Well, within the same couple years, we had Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance in 2002. This takes place after the events of Super Metroid. Introduces some incredible new mechanics as Samus Aran finds herself with owing her life to the baby Metroid in more ways than one. I'm not going to give you the super details of that because it would spoil the ending of Super Metroid, which you need to see because you need to play that game. And in the process, as I said, introduces brand new mechanics that do tweak the way that Metroid is played while still retaining the perfectly balanced mechanics. So if you're familiar with Metroid games, you're going to understand what you need to do, but you're still doing them in a slightly different way. So you're going to be like, hey, this feels like a Metroid game, but it's still giving me something new to chew on. Chew on. It's a great game. My biggest problem with it is ultimately there are a couple bosses in it that are just obscenely difficult. Spoilers, I've owned Metroid Fusion for years. I have never beaten it because I hit these bosses, I struggle against them, and I struggle against them, and I struggle against them, and eventually I rage quit, and then I come back, but it's been so long, I feel like I just need to start again from scratch, and I just kind of hit that cycle. But it is definitely in the top half of Metroid games. You know, play Super Metroid, play Zero Mission, and go play Metroid Fusion. It's going to be high on the list. And, you know, more power to it. Yeah, there's I mean, it's hard to say anything else to it without spoiling the plot, except that in kind of a variant on a lot of Metroid games, this takes place on a very large science research space station instead of a planet like the previous 3 Metroid games have taken place on. So it does give you a little bit of a different feel and a vibe to it, including introducing a little hub area, safe station, which technically we had in Super Metroid if you go to the surface of the planet. This kind of makes it a little more obvious. You've got good zone division because it is a man-made satellite, so it is literally divided into different environmental zones. It's fun time. Fun time. Next, though, we do hit the Prime series. The Prime is part of the Metroid series. It is part of the ongoing One Big Timeline Metroid lore, but in a lot of ways, Metroid Prime is treated as a sub-series. Metroid Prime is also the introduction into 3D, where they made the decision to not only make it 3D, but go first person throughout the game, making it akin to stuff like a Doom-style game, where you see what's in front of you, and you turn, and you see your gun, and that's about it as far as you go. Except for, and this is one of the beautiful aspects of Metroid Prime, there's a few areas where you will actually get condensation on your visor or get a brief bright flash of light, and during those sequences you will see the reflection of Samus Aran's face in the visor for a brief moment. And it's just that little attention to detail that is so beautiful. It never feels forced on you. It just feels like a natural consequence of being in that kind of environment. The basic plot of Metroid Prime is that you end up visiting a planet called Talon 4 that was colonized by the Chozo race, who gave Samus Aran her battlesuit and raised her from her youth as an orphan. The Chozo being bird-like people. This meant that the game did a lot to increase the concept of the Chozo race as more than just a trivia note in Samus's backstory, and the occasional, briefly mentioned source of some of her upgrades, into a full-blown civilization with their own lore and history. In the process, we also get introduced to Phazon, which is a unique form of energy that is very dangerous to a lot of living things. Eventually, the Phazon, which mutates after exposure to Samus and would create Dark Samus, a pseudo-organic, kind of living evil doppelganger of Samus that would show up throughout the Prime Trilogy. Speaking of that, a few years later after Prime in 2004, we got Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. This is a very worthy follow-up, embracing everything Prime did right in the conversion of Samus to 3D. This time you journey to a planet called Aether, trying to rescue some good guy soldiers, only to find out that it has been invaded by Dark Samus, and that Aether itself is dimensionally linked to a Dark Aether, adding a brand new kind of puzzle element to the game where at random points you will have to portal between Light Aether and Dark Aether to transverse different sections of the game, as well as giving a more in-depth exploration of the nature of Phazon and what continued exposure to it is doing to Samus herself, as well as her technology. Honestly, the whole mirror flip thing between worlds, I didn't like it. The game does a lot of good things right, but the fact that it's like every time you get really into the fun exploring thing that made games like Super Metroid and Metroid Prime so epic, it all grinds to a halt because it's like, oh, you have to solve a blatant puzzle area. Like the earlier games would have sequences where it's, okay, I can't quite make this jump. Oh, I got to use my grapple beam. Or, oh, it's a tight tunnel. Okay, morph ball. It doesn't take you long to figure out that you need a specific upgrade to get to a specific section. It's just something it does to add some semblance of linearness to the game so that you transverse along something resembling a set path so the story makes sense. Metroid Prime 2, though, it feels like a sudden screeching halt to that kind of exploring because, well, you gotta backtrack slightly to another area, a few feet back, go to get the little portal warp into Dark Aether, and then you gotta poke around Dark Aether and find the part of it that lets you skip through this part that you can't cross in Light Aether. and then you'll just jump back to Light Aether, and then you can proceed. It's too much puzzle element for Metroid games, which have always had that atmospheric strength of being some resemblance of steady exploration. Like, you explore, you say, okay, I can't get farther because I don't have an upgrade. Instead, in Prime 2, it's like, okay, I'm exploring, I can't get any farther. Is it because I don't have the right upgrade, or is it because I've got to do one of those little bounce between dimensions puzzle things? Let me go back, stop, make sure I didn't miss a Dark Aether portal. It's one of those things that it disrupts the mood. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say we're not doing a hard tier list as we go, but Prime 2 is lower on the list. They give credit to the game designers. They designed a great game, but they introduced a gimmick that didn't quite play very well. But that's okay, because we got a brief spin-off in Metroid Prime Pinball. This is exactly what it sounds like. It is a pinball game themed to the Metroid Prime series. That's all you need to say about it. We also got a spin-off that takes place between the events of Metroid Prime and Prime 2 called Metroid Prime Hunters, where you run into a group of bounty hunters while trying to explore another bit of bad people being bad out in space. It's generally, for what it is, it's a good game. But the game was, it came out on the DS. It was the first Metroid thing on the DS, and the game felt more like it was about showing off what the DS might be able to do for the Metroid series. You know, with the dual screen and the touch screen capabilities, than just plain making a good Metroid game. So it's kind of in the middle of things. Finally, the Prime Trilogy and the chasing down of Dark Phazon Samus concludes with Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. This time, Samus Aran works alongside and occasionally against 3 other bounty hunters, trying to clear a computer virus from a series of organic supercomputers called Aurora units located around the galaxy. You also spend time exploring multiple worlds, including one that is threatened by what is basically a Phazon meteorite. When it's all said and done, you put down Dark Samus, deal with the Phazon corruption in Samus's body, and go through a wonderful storyline. The game is certainly better than Prime 2, but in a lot of ways feels like it's still a step below the original Prime, with the expanded cast of allies, as well as the fact you're exploring multiple planets and areas, taking away from that moody, I'm stuck here, I've got to survive this one way or the other feel that Prime and of course Super Metroid give you. Still, it's a very enjoyable game, and I would recommend it for people that want more of the Metroid Prime goodness, but like me are not big on blatant mood-halting puzzles that we got in Prime 2. Quick honorary mention that because Prime and Prime 2 were released on GameCube, where Prime 3 was released on Nintendo Wii, We then got Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Wii, which was a compilation release bringing the Prime games onto the Wii, including tweaking the gameplay controls to match the Wii Remote and nunchuck style that Prime 3 used. If you have the ability to play Wii games, and you can grab a copy of this for less than grabbing a copy of the 3 games separately, I would go ahead and grab this. It's not really a huge difference as far as gameplay element. These are not remakes. As I said, this is more of a compilation. So you are getting the feel of the earlier Prime games, how they would play on the GameCube, but on a different system. Slightly more advanced system, which, you know, is good. I'm always up for compilation discs. I do like a good collection with minimal tweaking. Now we go ahead and get to the other game released on the Nintendo Wii, the Metroid series, the one that most people consider the worst game of the franchise, Metroid Other M. Similar to Fusion's Metroid Other M, takes place on a space station and features kind of a hybrid 2D and 3D style gameplay. It was basically an attempt to differentiate itself from the Prime Trilogy, do a bit of a throwback to the first trilogy of games, while also retaining, you know, respect to the different things that Prime did to help build a new audience of modern gamers. But the fact that its storyline, which involves a lot of flashbacks to Samus's earliest days as a young bounty hunter allied with the Galactic Federation and relationships with certain soldiers that were first introduced in Fusion but are much expanded on in Other M, it garners a lot of criticism for mood and story as we see a much more human and vulnerable Samus Aran. Now, I get it. I grew up with Samus Aran being Samus Aran. By and large, lone, badass bounty hunter. The kind of female protagonist where even after you know the big reveal that it's a female protagonist, you don't care that it's a female. Because you're just running around kicking butt with a big old gun arm, with a lot of variant modes to it and ammo to shoot. And I'm not going to say Other M necessarily overly feminizes Samus Aran, but the focus on her characterization and history and what was intended to be a honest and respectful look at a touch of PTSD that a person would naturally encounter after going through all the things Samus has gone through, as I said, does present a more vulnerable and human Samus, which people feel like wasn't good. And the fact the game, as I said, tried to merge the mechanics of the early 2D games and the later 3D Prime games, it bothered people. I don't hate the game as much as a lot of people do, but I will concede that it is not in the upper echelon of Metroid games either. I do agree to putting it towards the bottom, but, you know, with games like, you know, the original Metroid 2, you can make an argument there's worse Metroid games out there. Not a lot. But I'm just saying, if you're looking at the bottom of the barrel, Other M's not that far below some of the other games. Sorry, guys. I'm not going to rant and hate on it. It made mistakes that hurt the franchise's growing fan base. The fact that it was made by Team Ninja, who had never done a Metroid game before, might have had something to do with it, but in the end, I'm not going to blame Team Ninja completely. Nintendo had to give approval when it's all said and done. They did. And ultimately, as I said, I can see what they were going for, and I salute them for what their intent was. It just wasn't well executed. Speaking of spin-offs, we have for the 3DS Metroid Prime Federation Force. Similar to Metroid Prime Hunters, this game actually features a lack of Samus Aran, as it focuses on different Federation Force soldiers going through various parts of training and research missions on multiple planets, although you are still fighting the space pirates. The game is generally not well received due to the fact it is not all about Samus Aran leading the charge, and that it came out right after Other M, which was a low point for the series, and so introducing a spin-off felt like a lot of fans as a continued lack of understanding of what fans want in Metroid. Still, as I say, it's not an unplayable game. It's not a broken game. It's a great 3DS game. It's just not a great Metroid game. So I would say only put this on the playlist if you are going for that Metroid franchise completionist vibe. This leads us up to the most recent game released, coming out last fall in October of 2021 for the Nintendo Switch, Metroid Dread. The game takes place after the events of Metroid Fusion and retains the side-scrolling gameplay of previous 2D Metroid games. The game is seen in many ways, storyline-wise, as a direct follow-up to Metroid Fusion, and has received critical acclaim, including winning the award for Best Action Adventure Game at the Game Awards 2021, and became the fastest-selling Metroid game in Japan, the UK, and the US, having sold nearly 3 million copies, meaning it is also the best-selling Metroid game of all time. I'm not going to go too much into storylines because this being the newest Metroid game, I can't really touch on the plots without getting into major spoiler territories, except that you are once again in control of Samus, and that is a good thing. However, this does not necessarily mean that there's nothing left for the Metroid franchise. Retro Studios is back at it with the long-awaited Metroid 4. Originally announced during E3 2017, it was confirmed in 2019 that work is still continuing on it, and that the game is still on the slate to be released, although there is not a confirmed release date as of yet. So, are we going to go back to a pure 3D environment? Who knows? Still, the future looks good with Dread and Prime 4. It seems that Nintendo has finally listened and knows once again what they are doing with Samus Aran. Let's break it all down. Here's the big bad summary. Metroid deserves a place along with Mario and Zelda in the upper echelon of Nintendo first-party titles. Also Kirby. I can't believe I almost forgot everybody's pink fluff ball. Samus Aran is one of the icons of the video game industry, not just for being a female protagonist that is strong and powerful in her own right, while still maintaining some female charm without feeling blatantly sexually objectified at any point. Although, again, I'm sorry, some of those good completion endings, even if we did upgrade from a bikini to the Zero suit, which is an improvement on things. You know, depending on what you're into, those still pictures on the end credits there can be a little flirtatious. But it's still, you know, again, it's part of that balance of saying, look, you know, some people are just going to find females attractive no matter what the female does. Let's not be afraid to have female protagonists because of that. Should you play some Metroid games? Yes. Start with Super Metroid. Bust out some Prime. After that, I would say go in whatever direction you like. Zero Mission and Metroid Samus Returns are excellent remakes and do everything remakes should do. Fusions is a great run-through after you've played a few other Metroid games and want something that's got that Metroid feel but still got some mechanic differences without going crazy. The Prime sequels, you know, give them a try, see if they work for you. As I said, I enjoy Prime 3, but not quite as much as the original. The spin-offs, well, like most spin-offs, if you really just absolutely have to have more Metroid lore in your life, go ahead and give them a run-through. Things like Other M and Metroid 2, you can probably miss them. Although if you do want to sit there and decide for yourself just how much Metroid M missed, or Other M missed the mark, give it a playthrough for yourself. Just don't pay too much money for it. You know, I'm just saying. You know, as many people as there is that have been disappointed with it, probably not something you should pay like $50-$60 to play, just in case. But do try to give any given Metroid game a fair chance. We've definitely gone long, but, you know, these video game franchise breakdowns tend to do that. Even doing minimal detail work, when you have as many games as we covered, you can't really go through this in a perfect little tiny nugget. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this off here because we are almost at an hour, and I do hate to take up too much of your day because I do recognize that we all have a lot of things to do. So enjoy the rest of September. Like, subscribe, click the notification bell if you haven't already, because as I said at the top of the hour, once we get into the final quarter of the year, that's when we start getting really thematic and fun right here at Roulette Productions. I don't want you to miss any of it, and I don't want you to miss the rest of September with the Friday Ramblings because it is all good. Goodbye, good health, good luck, and I hope to see you soon.